On the evening, a basketball legend walked to the top of a grand marble staircase in Paris. The most exclusive store in the city fell completely silent. Every designer, every celebrity, every buyer in that glittering room turned to look up at the tall man in the perfectly tailored black suit. And the one person who understood exactly what was about to happen was an 81-year-old woman standing quietly near the back. A woman who had been turned away from that very door only 9 days before. She pressed a hand to her chest and whispered under her breath, "Oh, Michael, what have you done?" What her son was about to say would not simply settle one insult. It would change the way that store treated every person who walked through its doors. But to understand why a man would move heaven and earth over a single closed door, you have to go back 9 days, to a grey afternoon, and a birthday that almost broke a proud woman's heart. The rain was still holding back from the pale Parisian sky, as Dolores Jordan walked along one of the most fashionable streets in the city. It was her 81st birthday, and for once she had decided to treat herself. After a lifetime of hard work, of saving every coin and putting her children first and herself last, she had decided that today she would buy something beautiful for no reason other than that she was still here, still standing, still worthy of something lovely. She stopped in front of a bright store window and caught her reflection in the glass. Her short silver hair had been tousled by the wind. She was dressed simply in dark trousers, comfortable shoes, and a plain blue sweater. Nothing extravagant, she thought, but clean and neat and honest, the way she had always been. "The perfect moment," she murmured with a small smile, "to buy myself a birthday gift." In front of her stood her destination, Maison Belcourt, one of the most exclusive stores in Paris, a place whispered about by movie stars and heiresses. The storefront gleamed like a jewel. Dolores felt a flutter of nerves. She did not want anything excessive, just a keepsake to mark 81 years of life. Maybe a silk scarf, something small she could touch on hard days, and remember that she had once given herself a gift in Paris. As she approached, she noticed a tall man in a black suit at the door. His name tag read Leon. He had slick dark hair, a thin moustache, and sharp eyes that measured every person who passed. A well-dressed couple walked up ahead of her, the woman in diamonds, the man carrying glossy bags. Leon opened the door with a warm smile and a low bow and welcomed them inside. Dolores reached the door just after them. She took a breath and stepped forward, and Leon's smile vanished. His eyes narrowed as they travelled over her worn shoes and plain sweater. Before she could say a word, he shifted his body to block the entrance. "I am sorry, madame," he said smoothly, "but we are closed today for a private event." Dolores blinked. "But those people just walked in," she said, gesturing toward the couple browsing happily inside. Leon's expression hardened. "They are on the special guest list," he said. Through the glass she could plainly see people shopping in the ordinary way. Another elegant woman stepped up beside her, and without a word Leon moved aside and let her pass. "I only wanted to buy a small gift," Dolores explained, keeping her voice even. "It is my birthday today." Leon raised an eyebrow and scanned her clothing again. "Perhaps another store would suit your budget better," he said. "There are lovely little tourist shops down by the river." Dolores felt her face grow hot, and in that moment she was no longer an 81-year-old woman being turned away by a doorman. She was 30 again, a young single mother in worn shoes with 3 hungry children at home, standing before someone who had already decided she did not belong. She had felt this exact feeling before, more times than she could count, and she had hoped, foolishly, that she had outlived it. Inside, a young dark-haired employee named Amara had watched the whole scene, and her stomach twisted with shame. She leaned toward her supervisor and asked softly, "Are we not supposed to let her in?" The supervisor cut her off. "Mind your own section, Amara. Leon knows who belongs here and who does not." Outside, Dolores straightened her back. She would not cry. She had faced far worse than a rude man at a door. "I understand," she said calmly. "Thank you for your time." And she turned and walked away. Just as she reached the corner, the first drop of rain fell and slid down her cheek like a tear she refused to shed. In her small hotel room, Dolores wrapped herself in the thin hotel robe and stood at the window watching the rain streak the glass. She had not cried when Leon turned her away. She had lived through too much for that, but a deep and quiet sadness settled over her, and that was when she picked up her phone and called her son. When the video connected, she quickly fixed her hair and put on her brightest smile. Michael's face filled the screen, tired but happy. "Hey there, birthday girl," he said, warm enough to fill the whole empty room. They talked about the city lights, and then he asked the question that undid her. "You bought yourself something special, right?" he said. "It is not every day my mom turns 81. The question landed on a bruise. She tried to hold her smile, but something flickered across her face, and Michael saw it. "Mom," he said quietly, "what happened?" "Nothing important," she said. "Just a bit of rain that caught me off guard." But his voice came back gentle and firm. "You have never been any good at lying," he said. "Tell me," so she told him. "I went to a luxury store to buy myself a birthday present, and the man at the door would not let me in. I did not look rich enough for their taste." And she forced a laugh that did not sound like a laugh at all. Michael's easy smile disappeared, and in its place came something calmer and far more intense. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. And the whole story poured out. The smug face, the lie about a private event, the tourist shops. "I felt like I was 30 again," she admitted, "judged by everyone who looked at me." Michael was silent a long moment. When he spoke, his voice held that quiet control she remembered from his childhood, the calm before a storm of determination. "What was the store called?" he asked. "Maison Belcourt," she said. "But Michael, please, do not do anything dramatic. Promise me." He smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. "I promise I will not do anything to embarrass my mother," he said. That was not quite the promise she had asked for. But she knew her eldest son well enough to know it was the best she would get. When they said good night, he told her he loved her, and she told him the same. But the moment the screen went dark, Michael Jordan stopped smiling. He sat alone for a long minute, and then he picked up the phone and made the first of many calls. By 6 the next morning he was at his desk when his assistant, Elliot, arrived and found the coffee untouched. "I need everything on a store in Paris called Maison Belcourt," Michael said. "Who owns the building, who owns the brand, and who they answer to." By mid-morning, Elliot was back with an armful of reports. Belcourt was run by an old house called the Verlaine Group, more than 100 years old but quietly struggling, he explained. The flagship building is owned by a separate holding that has been trying to sell it for over a year. No buyers. Michael read the pages twice, then asked Elliot to get his lawyer on the line. The call was short and precise. He did not talk about revenge. He talked about numbers. He wanted the building and a controlling stake in the company that ran the store, enough to sit at the table and steer it. Not a hostile takeover, a rescue with conditions. His lawyer, a sharp woman named Grace, pushed back at once. "Michael, this is a personal grievance turning into a 9-figure decision," she said. "Are you certain?" Michael leaned back. "Do you know what my mother did when I was 12, and some boys were tormenting me?" he said. She walked into the principal's office and refused to leave until they fixed it. She worked 5 jobs to feed us and never once complained. There was a pause. Then Grace said, "All right, let me build the deal so it makes sense on paper and not just in your heart." And here is where most people would have simply sent the money and the lawyers. Michael did something else. 2 days later, he flew to Paris himself. He did not announce it. On a quiet grey afternoon, he pulled a plain grey sweater over his shoulders, put on an old ball cap, and walked up to Maison Belcourt on his own 2 feet, the way any ordinary man might. Leon was at the door. His eyes swept over the sweater and the cap, and something in his face cooled. He did not quite block the way, but he did not open the door either. He simply looked past Michael toward a better-dressed pair and let his silence do the work. Michael stood in that beautiful cold room for 90 seconds, unhelped, unwelcomed, watched. No one said a rude word, no one had to. And that, he realized, was the point. It was not one cruel man. It was a whole quiet system that had been taught to measure a person by the cut of their coat. He turned and walked out into the drizzle, and by the corner his plan had changed shape. This was no longer only about his mother. It was about the machine. He would buy the building. He would take a controlling investment in the Verling Group, keep the staff and the management on one condition, that they let him reshape how the store treated the people who walked through its doors. He would keep everything truly luxurious about Belcourt and cut away the one thing that never should have been: the belief that dignity was something you earned at the door. Leon, for his part, had a secret he never spoke aloud. Years earlier, at a different store, he had let a shy young man in a cheap coat browse for an hour, and the man had bought nothing, and Leon had been written up for wasting the floor on the wrong clientele. A month later he was quietly let go. When Belcourt hired him, the message was clear: protect the image, keep the numbers clean. Every time Leon turned someone away, he heard that instruction in his head and told himself he was only doing the job they trained him for. It did not make it right, but it made him a man and not merely a villain. Meanwhile, Dolores tried to enjoy Paris in spite of everything. She sat in a sunlit cafe and let her mind drift back nearly 50 years, to a small apartment and 3 young children and bills she could never quite pay. She remembered the day her 10-year-old boy came home with a bruised eye, because other children had said his family was poor and would never be worth anything. She had pressed a cold cloth to his face and told him the truest thing she knew. Being poor does not make us less than anyone, she had said. What matters is who we are, how hard we work, and how we treat other people. True worth is not about what you own. It is about how you make others feel. Her young son had looked at her with those intense eyes and promised, when I grow up, I will make sure no one ever looks down on you again. She had smiled then, never dreaming how seriously he would take it. 1 week after the rejection, a heavy cream envelope arrived at her hotel, engraved in gold, inviting her to a special evening at Maison Belcourt, formal attire requested. Dolores stared at it. Belcourt, the very store that had turned her away. This had to be Michael. She thought about calling to demand an explanation, then paused. If her son had gone to all this trouble, perhaps she should trust him and see it through. She found the one elegant black dress she had packed just in case and said quietly to herself, "Well then, I suppose I am going back to Belcourt after all." But the day before that evening, the walls of Belcourt were already trembling. Madame Fournier, the woman who ran the store, had been handed a stack of transfer papers to sign. Halfway down the second page, in the small print of the new ownership, one name stopped her cold. Jordan. She read it 3 times. She knew that name the way the whole world knew it. Her hands went damp. She understood in a single sickening instant that the new owner was not some faceless fund, but a man famous across the planet. A man who would surely have his reasons for choosing this store, of all the stores in Paris. She said nothing to the staff. She told herself silence was safest, but that night she could not sleep. Leon noticed her fear before he understood it. And then, waiting for a late delivery, he saw a business magazine left on the break room table, and on its cover was a tall, bald man in a dark suit, and Leon's blood turned to ice. He knew that face. He had seen it 2 days ago, under an old ball cap, in a plain grey sweater, standing unwelcomed on his own floor while Leon looked the other way. He had turned the new owner away with his silence, and somewhere underneath that horror, a second, worse thought surfaced. The elegant woman was coming tomorrow, the one whose exact face he could not quite place. He lay awake all night with the terrible feeling of a man who has already made his mistake, and can do nothing now but watch it arrive. The next evening, the store shimmered with 1,000 tiny lights and a small orchestra playing softly. The staff, in their finest, did not know who had bought their future. Only 2 of them knew, and neither could speak. Outside, limousines lined the street. Leon stood at his post, bowing to each glittering guest, his smile stretched thin over dread. And at 5 minutes to 7, a taxi pulled up, and an elegant older woman in a simple black dress stepped onto the red carpet with her head held high. Leon recognized her now. "Welcome to Belcourt, madame," he said, and his voice nearly broke on the words. Dolores looked him straight in the eyes. "Thank you," she said. "How nice to be welcome this time," and she stepped past him into the store while his face went white. Inside, the room was packed with the elite of Paris, all whispering, all wondering. Amara spotted Dolores across the room, and their eyes met, and Amara offered a small apologetic smile. Dolores returned a gentle nod that said she understood. At 7, the lights dimmed, the orchestra fell silent, and a voice asked the guests to turn to the grand staircase for an announcement from the store's new owner. Every eye lifted. A figure appeared at the top of the marble steps. Madame Fournier closed her eyes, and Dolores Jordan pressed a hand to her chest and whispered, "Oh, Michael, what have you done?" Michael Jordan stood at the top of the staircase in a perfectly tailored black suit, and the spotlight made his presence enormous. He did not speak right away. His eyes moved slowly across the crowd until they found his mother, and a small private smile passed between them. Then he began to descend, one unhurried step at a time. When he reached the bottom, he took a glass from a passing waiter but did not drink. "Good evening," he said, his voice carrying easily through the silent store. "I know you are wondering why a man who spent his life in sport and business would invest in a luxury house in Paris. Before I explain, I would like to invite someone very special to join me." "Mom," he said gently, "please come up here." Every head turned. Dolores moved gracefully through the crowd, and as she passed Leon, she gave him a small nod. When she reached her son's side, he took her hand. "For those who do not know, this is my mother, Dolores Jordan, the strongest person I have ever known." The crowd applauded. 9 days ago, he continued, she came to Belcourt on her 81st birthday to buy herself something small, and she was turned away at the door. Not because the store was closed, but because, in her plain clothes, she did not look like someone who belonged. A murmur ran through the room. "Here is what I want you to understand," Michael said. "I am not here to punish one man. 2 days ago I walked into this store myself, in an old sweater and a cap, and I was treated the very same way. So this is not about a single bad day. It is about a habit this whole business was taught, and habits can be unlearned." He told them the truth in plain words. He had not erased their company. He had invested in it, taken the building and a controlling share, and he intended to keep the staff, the craft, and the quality exactly as they were. Belcourt would remain a house of true luxury, its finest goods still sold at full price. But one thing would change, starting now, the belief that a person had to look wealthy to be treated with respect. "When I was a boy," he said, "my mother worked 5 jobs to keep us fed, and still there were doors that would not open for her, simply because of how she looked. Tonight that stops here." The plan he laid out the next morning he called the Dolores Project. Belcourt would keep selling its finest work at full price, so nothing was cheapened. But a share of the store's own profit would now support single parents and their children. And part of the collection would become a community line, offered at gentler prices to the people who give more than they receive. The teachers, the nurses, the firefighters, verified quietly online so no one was ever judged at the door. From now on, he told the staff, the doors of Belcourt are open to anyone, and it is your job to make every person feel equally valued. Amara felt a smile she could not hold back, and then something surprised everyone. Leon did not quit. He asked Michael for a private meeting, and there, his old confidence gone, he told the truth about the write-up years ago, the quiet firing, the instruction he had carried like a stone ever since. "I told myself I was doing my job," Leon said. "I would like to learn a different one if you will let me." Michael studied him a long moment. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he said finally, "but you will earn this one. Before you stand at that door again, you will spend a month volunteering at a shelter across the city, not as punishment, so that you never again mistake a person's clothes for their worth." Leon nodded, and for the first time in years he did not argue. When the store reopened, the sales climbed rather than fell. The press took notice, some calling it a revolution and some a stunt, And Michael only shrugged and said that if calling it a stunt helped more people hear that everyone deserves dignity, they could call it whatever they liked. A handful of other houses, watching Belcourt's numbers rise, quietly began to wonder if they might try the same. It was not the whole world changing overnight. It was one store proving a point. That was enough. But the part of the story Michael would remember had nothing to do with sales or press or other stores. 1 year later, on a quiet evening, he found his mother sitting in the empty store after closing, a silk scarf folded in her hands. He sat down beside her. "There is something I never told you," he said. She waited, the way she had waited through every hard truth of his childhood. "When I was 24, he began, I was just starting out with almost no money, living on the cheapest food I could find. It was your birthday. I wanted to buy you something beautiful, to show you that all your sacrifices had meant something. So I saved for months until I had enough for one small scarf from a luxury store. I put on the only suit I owned, second-hand, bought for job interviews, and I walked in, nervous and proud. And the man at the door looked at me and said the store was closed, though through the window I could see people shopping inside. I was too ashamed to argue. I walked away, still holding the money I had saved for months. Dolores pressed her hand to her heart, hearing this for the first time. "Oh, Michael," she said softly, "all these years and you never said a word. I was ashamed," he admitted, and later it did not seem important. "But I made a promise that day that when I could, I would make sure you, and people like you, were never made to feel that way again. So when you called me from Paris, it was never only about one evening. It was about a promise almost 20 years old." He turned to her and placed the scarf gently in her hands. "I never did buy you that scarf when I was 24, he said. "Happy birthday, Mum." A year late, and 20 years late, and right on time. Dolores looked down at the scarf, then at her son, the boy who had once slipped his small hand into hers in a landlord's shadow and promised to build her a better world. She did not try to stop the tears. "You know what I am proudest of," she said, "not the store. Not the money, that you carried that hurt for 20 years, and it did not make you hard. It made you kind." She reached up and touched his face. "That is the thing I got right." They sat together in the quiet a while longer, mother and son, saying very little, the way people do when the important things have already been said. And there it is, the truth this whole story was quietly built around. Dignity was never meant to be a prize handed only to the wealthy or the important. It is not something you earn by the price of your shoes. It is the birthright of every person who walks through any door. The man who turned Dolores away believed that keeping people out was what made a place valuable. He had it exactly backward. What makes any place or any person truly valuable is not who they are willing to exclude. It is how they make the quietest, most overlooked person in the room feel seen. So remember that the next time you hold a door. You never know whose whole world you might change with nothing more than the decision to treat them as if they belong. And if this story touched something in you, stay with me, because the next one just might change the way you see the person standing quietly beside you.